Hi, everyone. I'm Francis James, the Industry Relations and Partnerships Director at Beneficial State Foundation. I'm the host and moderator of our quarterly DE&I Fireside Chat Series. I'm very excited to introduce our guest speaker. Aria Florant is co-founder and CEO of Liberation Ventures. At heart, she is a bridge builder, constantly traversing worlds between Black and white, grassroots and corporate, ethnic studies and finance. She is weaving partnerships across difference to forge a path toward racial repair in the United States. Prior to launching Liberation Ventures, Aria was an engagement manager at McKinsey, where she served public and social sector clients on issues related to strategy, organizational design, racial equity, and financial sustainability. Aria also helped develop the firm's early thinking on how to support clients on topics of racial equity and inclusive growth, which has now evolved into the McKinsey Institute for Black Economic Mobility. Prior to McKinsey, Aria was a not-for-profit practitioner and organizer in East Palo Alto, focusing on education, youth development, and civic engagement. In addition, Aria worked as an education consultant for the San Mateo County Private Defender Program, helping incarcerated youth navigate and complete college education requirements. In 2017, she helped launch the first ever round of programs for civic leaders at the Obama Foundation. Aria received a BA in Comparative Studies in Race and Ethnicity from Stanford, an MBA in Management for Social Change from the Wharton School, and an MPA in Management, Leadership, and Decision Sciences from the Harvard Kennedy School. Aria, thank you so much for joining our fireside chat this morning.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I've been an admirer and supporter of your work and the mission of Liberation Ventures since we were first introduced in 2023. It would be really helpful to learn the origin story of your organization.
Yeah, absolutely. So about 5 years ago, I think actually almost over 5 years ago now, which is wild, my co-founder and I came together, and at the time we had gone to Stanford together. And we really started first just kicking around ideas. He had been in the nonprofit sector. I had, as you mentioned, worked in nonprofits, but then I was at McKinsey at the time. And the biggest orienting question that we had was essentially, we felt like we were seeing really amazing work happening across the country that was incredible, that was very focused on treating symptoms of racial injustice. And we started asking ourselves, what would an even deeper root cause level intervention on racial injustice look like? We are students of the Racial Equity Institute's groundwater metaphor, which some folks may be familiar with, which is essentially, they use this metaphor where, if you are hiking down a path and you see some dead fish in a lake, you may think, what's wrong with the fish? And then if you go to the other side of the lake and you see more dead fish, you may ask, what's wrong with the lake? But then if you go to another lake and you see more dead fish, you then start to ask, what's wrong with the groundwater? And we started really asking, how do you treat the groundwater of racial injustice? How do you get further upstream so that then you're seeing positive ripple effects across different systems? And so that was our orienting question. We started thinking about, okay, well, what is the groundwater? How do we define it? These systems are so complex. We landed on racial disparity, wealth disparity, and anti-Black narratives as sort of these two really strong anchors that hold injustice in place. And we thought, okay, our theory then became, if we could shock the system on those two things, you could see a ripple effect of positive outcomes across different systems. So that sort of was our orienting frame. And we thought, okay, well then what would that be? What is that at scale policy and culture change? And we really then came to reparations. And so importantly, we define reparations as both financial and non-financial. Our biggest goal is policy change, but that policy is can look like different financial policies, as well as other policies that are meant to really try to change culture and uproot anti-Blackness from our culture. So that's how we landed on sort of our idea and concept. We then started diving into the reparations movement, learning more about the fact that this movement is older than emancipation. There have been people really carrying the torch since then. And as we started talking to them, the biggest thing that we heard was that this movement has been sort of chronically underfunded and never truly seen by mainstream philanthropy or other institutions. And so when we jumped in, our kind of hypothesis was that we might be able to be helpful at moving resources into the field. So that was our initial concept. And then as we built deeper relationships with folks, we realized that a couple of other things were needed as well. And so over time, we built out our work to also include narrative change and capacity building, and sort of solidified our role as a field catalyst in the reparations space.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. So one of Liberations Venture's core beliefs states that for this country to become whole, a transformation of our systems and culture is required. Liberation Ventures believes that we have to start at the root and talk openly about the pain and devastation of chattel slavery and the legacy of exploitation and devaluation that Black Americans continue to face even today. As your organization points out, there's no America without Black resilience, and there's no repair without Black healing. So can you describe for us your personal healing journey?
Yeah, and thank you for asking, because this is also a really important sort of reason why I care so much about this work. So I grew up in Fort Collins, Colorado, which is about an hour north of Denver. It is a very white town. I grew up in an interracial family. My mom is white and my dad is Black. And so the messages that I received at home growing up were always, and I think probably people in the audience will resonate, you are the only Black girl in your friend group and in your classes. You better be twice as good. You cannot give them any reason to doubt you. Dot all your I's, cross all your T's, be perfect, essentially. And when I was growing up, when I was a child, I didn't totally understand the context for why that was the case. It was just the way that, in particular, my dad taught me how to operate in the world in order to keep myself safe, really. And so when I went to college, I studied ethnic studies because I really needed to understand that. Like, I didn't have any of those classes growing up. And so I knew things from sort of an analytical perspective, but I didn't have an embodied understanding of what it meant that I was being given those messages growing up. And I didn't have a historical understanding. And so I think I chose comparative studies and race and ethnicity as my major, like, first, because it was a way for me to understand myself and my identity. And over time, then it became a way to understand the country, and the fact that the reason why I had experienced all of those things was just so tied to what this country has gone through since its inception. And I think over time that was a healing journey for me. So I will just say, learning more about this country's history helped me place into context why I had received those messages growing up, and also why, it helped me push back against things that people had said about my family and about my parents. And so I knew that racial justice would be my thing for my life. I just didn't know kind of what shape it would take. I think, though, that even more recently, what I have started to really come into an awareness of is, in particular, the shame that different communities feel when we think about this country's history. And so, I have proximity to my white mother and my white side of the family. And that is something that actually also sort of makes me passionate about this work. I mean, obviously I'm passionate about it because I'm a Black woman in this world and I get treated as a Black woman in this world. But that proximity to the shame that white folks feel is also, I think, really critical information for what holds this country back from being able to repair its past. Because if we can't actually face what we've gone through, then we definitely won't be able to repair it. And that's something that I see on a micro level. So it like in my own family all the time. And so I think that the process of me being able to hold the duality of my identity has also been a really important journey of healing for me. And I really see that mirrored in what the country it needs to go through.
Thank you for sharing your journey.
Yeah.
Socially, culturally, and politically, I would contend that we are in a very tenuous moment in time. We've seen a sharp backlash against the global outcry for racial justice after George Floyd's murder. And we've seen a rise in white nationalism, xenophobia, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, transphobia, and other forms of hate directed at historically marginalized communities. We've seen the banning of books in schools and libraries, and according to the American Library Association, most of the books pulled off shelves are written by or about members of the LGBTQ plus community and people of color. So in corporate America, we've seen a decline or abandonment of DE&I programs and racial justice investments. In academia, we've seen the demise of affirmative action practices. So in this moment, how do you draw hope and inspiration from your role at Liberation Ventures, given the social context I've just described?
Yeah. The number one way that I draw hope is by knowing and by being a student of history and knowing and remembering that backlash comes because we're winning. Mm. That to me, we've never had progress in this country without backlash. And so I've learned to sort of, I guess maybe almost as the Buddhists would say, like invite backlash in and do so in order to learn and be smart about what that backlash is going to look like so that we can embed into our strategies ways to anticipate it, to prevent it, and to mitigate it. I think, Miriam Kaba has this quote that, hope is a discipline. And so when I think about what hope means to me, it isn't just something that's kind of like abstracted and blind. Hope comes from disciplined action, and in particular, discipline about having a sober reality of where we are and being able to hold that in addition to the dream and the aspiration for where we want to go. And then being able to chart the path there. And so I think being able to hold those two and then be every day, I am so grateful every day that this is my job. Like, it is hard, but I think that it is such an honor to do this work. And so that also just gives me a lot of joy. And I think being in the action of, and in particular, even right in this moment, like cultivating the backlash to the backlash too, and using the backlash to make sure that people are aware of how many problems we still have and how important it is to repair in order to actually move through them for good. I think I think I'm lucky to get to do that work. So that's generally the way in which I hold it.
Perfect, thank you. It's clear that this journey for racial healing and repair in America will require a broad coalition, right? Your organization believes that non-Black people, both white and non-Black people of color, must be active agents of repair and be able to see themselves in the work of repairing the harms of slavery and its legacy. How is Liberation Ventures building this coalition, and what have you learned about this process of engagement and collaboration?
Yeah, this is one of my favorite questions, because this is a really important, I think, sort of narrative shift that we are trying to make on the topic of reparations. And so, most people, they think reparations and they just think cash, Black people, kind of like narrow public sector. And we think about it so much more expansively than that. And in particular, you know, we believe that reparations is critical to actually like really journeying toward arriving at a true, just, thriving multiracial democracy. And I'll talk about that. But that is for all of us, right? That benefits all of us. And so all of us then are required to actually help this country get there. And so the way I see it, reparations is not just, you know, Black folks are at the center, of course, but reparations really benefits all of us, because to me, if we have a culture of repair, then that means anytime we have breakdown, we have the skill and the will societally to repair it. And that also helps everyone, right? That helps not just, you know, building I almost think about it as going to the gym. Like when we build our muscles for repair, we get to use those muscles on all different types of issues. And I think that when we let those muscles atrophy, it's that's the problem, because anytime you have a society that is trying to hold difference, like a multiracial democracy, you will have that breakdown. But we are then only as strong as our ability to repair when that breakdown occurs. And so I really see reparation and building a culture of repair as part and parcel with being able to hold a thriving multiracial democracy for the long term. So that's why I'm so clear the reparations is for all of us, and therefore that all of us need to be in this coalition that are working toward it. We at Liberation Ventures are very explicitly a multiracial organization. We have a multiracial team, a multiracial board, and that's because we are working toward a multiracial democracy. And sometimes I get asked, you know, why don't you have an all-Black team? We are very intentional about like placing Black leaders on our leadership team and making sure that the leadership of the org is really driven by Black people. But what I say is, you know, Black people didn't create this problem, so we can't be on our own to solve it, you know? And I know that work is really hard, right? The work of building multicultural and multiracial institutions. It's something that we've never done fully and well as a country. And I think that we're actually in sort of a new era of really trying to do that better. You know, we have put so many sort of organizational processes in place to, in particular, name and distribute and talk about power in new and much more explicit ways within our organization. And that has been incredibly helpful for us to actually be a more intentional actor in sharing and distributing power, not only within LV, but also across our ecosystem. And I think that's actually a mirror of what the country needs to get better at. Like it's a real, like that's how you actually change the way that we govern together. I think that's it's important. It's incumbent upon it's extremely important for us to do that in order to, you know, in order to shift power from the sort of current power centers where it is.
Lovely, thank you for that. So I love the fact that your organization is unapologetically audacious about your mission, right? You are doing what you know is right as learners, and you're trying to do something that you don't fully yet know how to do. There are some parallels with your work in fostering systemic and cultural transformation and the work here at Beneficial State Bank and Foundation. Beneficial State exists to prove that banks can be stewards of our communities and our environment while meeting the expectations of regulators and shareholders. We see ourselves as learners first, and then change agents and advocates. So what is your organization learning about the deep challenges of this courageous undertaking, given that we are swimming against the tide of systemic racism and anti-Blackness?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing I want to say is that I just commend y'all for that, for being in what we would call sort of that liminal space, because it's a liminal space of needing to be successful operating in systems as they currently exist, but also trying not to like unduly reinforce them, since we know that they are so often harmful, and trying to actually transform them along the way. And that liminal space can be really, really tough to be in. And I always love being with partners who appreciate how hard it is to hold that complexity. And I think that, you know, one of the things that we're learning, I'll go back to what I named earlier about about naming and talking about power in new ways. I think one of the things I'm learning is just how important it is to develop a real interdependent relationship with power and with authority. I think often we either have a very dependent relationship or a counterdependent one, where everything authority figures do is bad. And that's because in so many areas of our life, we've been abused by authority figures, whether it's police or it's teachers or it's bosses, and I think actually in order to develop that interdependent relationship, you actually have to do some real healing around that relationship and that abuse. And so that, I would say, is one of the number one things, and I will just generalize it out, like the way that we have to be accountable for our own healing in this work has been one of my biggest learnings over the last couple of years, because I think in order to continue to every day show up with love, right? Show up in a posture of generosity and beloved community for the people that we are working with and working at, and our colleagues across the movement. It takes real healing from the things that kind of get us down every day. And I guess that also maybe goes back to your question about the hope piece and the backlash. There's so much to feel stress about. And so if we aren't doing that really intentional healing work, then it can get us down, and we can then start to show up and operate out of fear, which then actually perpetuates the cycle of harm that we're trying to break. And so that we have been thinking a lot as a field catalyst in our movement. How do we support and create the conditions for wellness and healing among all of our movement partners and our colleagues? We've been doing wellness stipends to all of our grantees. We have wellness stipends internally for all of our staff. But it's tough because the systems that we operate in are ones that, want us to just produce and produce and produce and work and not take the time to do that healing. And so I think for me, that has been one of the most important. And I think also that gets to the long-term nature of this work and the fact that it is a marathon, and that we actually have to care about our own longevity and our own kind of sustainability in the work, or else the movement will lose people and we will lose knowledge, and we really just won't be able to accelerate it and build the momentum that we need in order to win.
Lovely. Thank you for those insights. Liberation Ventures launched the Reparations Narrative Lab in August of 2022 after a year of strategic planning and interviews with experts and advocates across the growing reparations ecosystem. Since the launch of the Narrative Lab, you have brought together 13 brilliant champions across the racial justice movement to build a narrative schematic that is referenced as the Narrative House. So the Narrative House extends an invitation to all to participate in this movement, particularly those interested in using the power of story to help situate reparations for Black people in the United States as a necessity in creating a just and equitable world. The Narrative House is oriented towards shifting narratives and culture at the societal level. And while there is harm to be repaired between individuals, and information included in the Narrative House may support work at this level, it is primarily geared towards societal narratives baked into US culture. So can you share how you determined that it was vital to craft a narrative around this issue, and what has been the biggest impact of this work so far?
Yeah, oh my gosh. I mean, probably the way that we decided this was important was because so often when I go out into the world and we talk about our work, we realize that people don't think about reparations the way that we do. And in particular, also people don't think about reparations the way that the rest of the like global sort of humanitarian world thinks about it. So, reparations is a UN legal framework that has been used in so many other contexts, and it has even been used in the US as well. But there's a way in which when it's applied to Black people, it somehow becomes a divisive word or becomes a toxic word. And that's the actually sort of inherent anti-Blackness that's embedded in how so many people think about reparations in the US. And so we just knew that that was really, really, really important to change. We also knew that there are so many roadblocks. There are so many narratives about Black people in this country that are roadblocks to us being able to be successful, not just for the policy change, but also the current culture change. And I should note too that the way we see the interaction between those two is that culture change is what makes policy change durable. So we have to care about how people's hearts and minds are shifting along the journey to our destination of achieving the policy change. So yeah, and then we knew also that we couldn't do that work alone, and that the more minds on the problem are the better. And so, we brought together these 13 movement leaders. My colleague Trevor Smith led them through sort of a year-long process of meeting every week, where they learned about narratives that we're up against. We learned about the way that narrative has been used in other social movements, and then we got together in person in about over a year ago, and did this huge brainstorm about, okay, well then what are the narratives and the stories that we want to represent this movement? And really trying to build out the vision and the affirmative so that we know where we're going. We know the destination. And I think, that work is all available online at reparationsnarrativelab.org. And what I love about it is that there's also sort of framing activities. So you can download worksheets and use those worksheets to figure out how to take the work that you currently do and sort of apply the frame of reparations to it. And so I think that is one way that we can also really start to, talk about this work from the same page, or at least the same chapter of the book. Definitely not saying that everyone it's not prescriptive. It's not prescriptive talking points, but it's really more sort of how do we get our mental models aligned for what reparations could really mean and do for this country. And I think the last thing I'll just say is just, the power of storytelling and the power of really understanding and being intentional about how people make meaning of what they observe in the world. Like, we have to contend for that space as a movement. And that's what I see our narrative and culture change work doing.
Fantastic. So the narrative house starts off with a narrative North Star, which reads as a poem and a declaration. Through it, Liberation Ventures hopes to evoke a range of emotions while also painting a clear picture of your vision of the world once we've realized reparations for Black people in this country. Some of the declarations that I found most moving and evocative include: caring is neither womanly nor manly. We've abandoned that concept. We care for all at all times. No one has just one home, because we formed homes in our relationships, in each other. Anti-Blackness does not exist here. Truly, imagine that. In fact, we've unraveled our construction of race and finally concluded it's much easier to love than to hate. In a way, it feels like we've pushed the reset button. Black minds, hearts, and souls have been restored. In this new world, Black lives not only matter, they are also embraced, welcomed, cherished, celebrated, and deeply loved. There are no utopias, but damn, it feels good to be here. So when you share this beautiful and moving vision of a transformed society with others, what has been the response?
A great question. I think it depends, but I think in general, the narrative North Star asks people to pause and to imagine, like really actually try to imagine what the world looks like on the other side of reparations. And one thing I always say is that I don't want to fight people to the other side of reparations. I want to seduce people there. I want to create such a compelling vision for what that looks like for all of us that it's obvious that we need to move toward it. And it's obvious for all of us too, not just Black people. And I really believe that. I really believe that the alignment and the wholeness that comes from doing what you know is right and processing through that shame that I mentioned as a country, it is something that will reap such incredible dividends for all of us. So I think what the narrative, if I had to sum it up, I think the narrative North Star really takes us out of kind of that fight or flight posture and into a, like, if we can imagine it, we can build toward it. And imagining it with more and more and more sort of concreteness and just, I think, yeah, like flavor, color for people, is how we're going to bring it closer to fruition.
Lovely, thank you. So the work to create a movement that will enable reparations at a federal level can be described as a defining issue of our time. And from your research, dozens of state and local governments and public institutions are exploring what reparations for slavery and its vestiges could look like in their locality. So can you highlight some of the more promising efforts at the local or state level?
Yes, absolutely. So this is a burgeoning movement. There is so much incredible work happening all over the country. And it's happening at the local level, at the state level, but then it's also happening through, faith organizing. It's happening through young people organizing. It's happening through incredible research, incredible artists, incredible journalists doing this work to really build momentum. So many people know about Evanston in Illinois. Evanston passed reparations policy a few years ago, largely driven by an amazing woman named Robin Woo Simmons. They passed reparations policy and they have been dispersing that policy. And that policy is specifically focused on people who were harmed by Evanston's housing policy between 1919 and 1969. So that gave us a really good sort of model or archetype for how it can happen. There has then been a bunch of work happening at the state level in California, which you all have probably seen. California went first, so that was the test case, and there was a lot that went well, and also a lot that other states that are coming next are trying to avoid, that California unfortunately fell into. I think one of the biggest things was around this narrative about reparations just being about the money. We are really trying to expand people's conceptions about what reparations are from the very beginning in different states, so that it doesn't just become sort of a clickbait headline about the cost, because that really narrows and dilutes the conversation. But California, California did a lot of things right. The harm report that California created was an incredible sort of explication of what has happened and what needs to be repaired. And I'm really excited. LV is supporting a number of organizations in California who are now working on building the power to win policies that have been introduced by the legislature based on that harm report. So And we know too that that's just the beginning. Also, that this is going to be a process that takes a while. So California went, and New York actually is the next state to officially go. So Governor Hochul in New York signed a bill just last December, standing up a state level commission in New York. Commissioners were just chosen, let's see, about a month ago now, and so they will begin their work. If you know funders or folks in New York who you think might be interested, we are learning from California. We're actually going to start organizing a donor table of funders in New York to sort of learn alongside the coalition and really understand how they can plug in. So we have our first call kicking off this afternoon for that, in case anyone's interested. But I think there's a lot of really exciting promise in New York. And then New Jersey is also doing kind of a statewide effort. It is not driven by the legislature. It is driven by the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice. They stood up a reparations council because they weren't getting the traction that they wanted in the legislature. So they said, okay, we're gonna do it. We're gonna do the commission ourselves. And I think that's really interesting because we'll actually be able to weigh sort of the pros and cons of doing it that way versus through the state. There were a number of challenges that the commissioners in California faced because it was an official commission led, driven by the state, that the New Jersey folks on the council are not facing. So we'll learn from that. And I think, I'll just step back to also say that when we started this work, we did a ton of learning about what makes at scale policy and culture change efforts successful. And one of the clearest patterns that we saw across learning from other case studies like marriage equality and marijuana and the Affordable Care Act and the anti-death penalty movement was that they have gone state by state, and state by state they've built momentum that then sort of brought them to the federal level. And so I think it's really wonderful that New York has become the second state. We've now got, two dots make a line, and we can continue that trend. And I'm excited to support as they move forward.
Fantastic, thanks. So how do organizations like Beneficial State Foundation and Bank play a role in uplifting and amplifying your work?
Yeah, my gosh. So I would say a few things. So a few things. One is just being a champion for it in sort of whatever way that's possible for individuals at the bank or for the bank broadly. That can be introducing us to folks who want to support the work, either financially or in other ways. The bank itself supporting financially or in other ways. I think amplifying the narratives are also really important, really talking about the work in new ways that really bring people in. I think that's really important in particular for more mainstream institutions. To me, the more mainstream institutions start taking up this conversation, the more it becomes obvious, the more it becomes safe, the more it sort of builds it's like a snowball effect that then brings more and more people in. And so I think we've been seeing the early adopters across philanthropy and faith institutions and universities. But we need to start sort of moving up that adoption curve, or moving the Overton window, so to speak. And so the more institutions that are being vocal on this issue, the better, because it creates cover for the folks that are more hesitant or skeptical to step in. I'm also interested in, so one of the things that we also know is that in order to get true sort of cultural change, it isn't just the public sector that has caused harm to Black communities. The private sector has, and the social sector has. And so other outside of government, other institutions also have repair work to do. And we're seeing that start to happen in different sectors. So in particular, philanthropy is starting to reckon with the harm that the money from its endowments kind of originally caused, and the harm that, for different institutions, it depends, like they're looking at different things, but they're reckoning with what they need to repair based on their own histories. And we've seen that in the university sphere as well. I would love to see that in finance, right? And I say that knowing that beneficial state is likely not the institution that has caused the most harm. Like, I'm really thinking about the JP Morgans of the world who, were buying and selling slaves, like we're financing the buying and selling of enslaved people. But I think that, that's what I want us to get to with regard to how we're seeing a culture of repair really permeate across different institutions. So I would almost put it back to the folks in the audience, like what role could beneficial state play on helping that kind of domino start to fall? But if there are folks who are interested in talking about that, I would love to.
Thank you so much for joining us this morning, and just best of luck for all that you're doing in the organization moving forward. We're going to be staying in close communication, I'm sure, over time. Have a wonderful rest of the day. Take care.
Thank you so much for having me.